This is episode 8 of Chris Sweeney Talks 2, and today I'm joined by a communication skills teacher from Leeds. Her name is Daphne Franks. Now, what she now is going to educate us about is something maybe what you're not expecting. When you hear the term predatory marriage, what do you think? You probably think that the younger person is being the one who's in danger, the one who's vulnerable, the one who's been taken advantage of. But that is not the case in this. It's the younger person who is the predator. So if you don't know what we're talking about and you want to hear more, here we go with Daphne. Daphne, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Well, as I said there, predatory marriage, you have become a bit of an expert, but unfortunately, it's not through study, it's through personal experience. But before we get into that, maybe you could just give us a brief idea of what predatory marriage is, because as I said, when people hear the word predator, I think they assume a younger person has been taken advantage of and is vulnerable. But it's actually the opposite in this case.
From the opposite. Predatory marriage is a term we borrowed from Canada, and it means a younger person generally taking advantage of an older person generally who is either elderly or lacks mental capacity to make decisions, maybe because of dementia, something like that. And I don't think that's a full enough description. I think it's somebody who marries somebody who is vulnerable in some way to take advantage of them for their own purposes, whatever that may be. Generally, those purposes are money, but that's not the only purpose. From a lot of experience I've had in talking to other cases, a lot of it is about gaslighting, grooming, and coercive control particularly. It is that wanting for control of another person and probably their family as well.
Yeah, because you mentioned there. Obviously, you and I are based in the UK, but it's happening in Canada, and it's happening all around the world. It's not just in these countries. So, I know it's not the most pleasant thing to talk about, but maybe you can give us an idea of your own experience of it, because previous to happening to yourself, you probably weren't too aware of the phenomenon either. It's something you've had to learn about, through personal experience.
It is. Well, basically, what happened is, my mum lived next door to us, so this is a really important point. We saw her all the time, every day. She had vascular dementia. A much younger man who was 67 at the time of the marriage, she was nearly 92. A much younger man just seemed to move into her house very quickly. And we were really worried. We were worried from the start. We went to all the authorities for help, but nobody seemed able to help. And the police at the beginning said, well, he's there at your mother's invitation. There's nothing that can be done about it. And I tried to explain she has dementia. She doesn't know he's living there. But I did not seem able to get it across. And again, I'm not blaming any group of people for what happened. And that's one thing I've learned. It's an absolute lack of procedures and incentive in the law for this to happen. So I'm not blaming anyone. But the way we found out was my mother died at home on the 26th of March 2016, and that was Easter Saturday. And then the Easter weekend, everything was quiet. And then on Easter Tuesday, when everything opened up again, we got a phone call from my mother's GP. And he sounded really worried. And he said, Daphne, did you know your mother was married? And it was one of those, I'm going to have to sit down, because we had seen it all coming. We'd been to everyone we could think of to try and prevent it, and it had got us nowhere. And my mother was nearly 92 at the time of the marriage, with a 5-year history of vascular dementia all through her medical notes. And I had power of attorney because she couldn't make the simplest financial decision. She couldn't identify a pound coin. And yet she was allowed to marry. And it just astonished us. We thought, how on earth can this have happened? So we set about trying to work out how it had happened. And once we found out how relatively easy it was to do, we thought there must be other cases. And we set up a website and we started hearing from other cases. And that's when we went to our MP.
It's astonishing. Did you ever find out when she actually got married? I mean, did she go to a ceremony? Was it I mean, I take it there wasn't a party. It was a very low key marriage. I mean, did you remember that day, her leaving or something, and you had no idea she was going to get married?
She had no idea that A, she was going to get married, or B, she got married. The man just arranged it all. She never knew. And she was wearing the wedding ring that my dad had given her till the day she died. So she didn't even have a new wedding ring. So he kept it totally secret. The witnesses at the marriage, we found out later, were his son and a lady from the pub. And it was all very quiet. And after the wedding, he took her away to Blackpool for a few days, called in at her brother's house on the way back. And her brother was afterwards convinced that that was a test to see if she would remember. But she didn't. I had timed her memory just a couple of weeks before by chance, and it was 4 minutes. So he could have brought her straight home. She would not have known. She never knew she was married.
I mean, when you talk about it, it's absolutely astonishing. But I mean, for you, it wasn't the shock of that. Then what happened was, sadly, when your mother did pass away, then all her sort of estate was left to her new husband. And it was a bit of a. I mean, that must be very traumatic and difficult for you to deal with.
It's not just the estate; it's that the spouse now becomes the personal representative, the person in charge. So basically, the problem is that in England and Wales, marriage revokes a will. My mother had made a will back in 2004, leaving everything to me and my brother. So if you make a will and then you remarry, your will is gone as if it's never existed. And a lot of people find that hard to believe. And in many countries, they're doing away with that. So in Scotland, marriage doesn't revoke a will, but in England and Wales it does. In France it doesn't. In the Netherlands it doesn't. Canada are busy changing all the provinces so it doesn't, because they've invented the term predatory marriage. So this marriage revoking a will is a huge legal incentive to predators, and we are trying to get that done away with, because it seems incredibly old-fashioned in 2022 that marriage still revokes a will.
No, absolutely. And I mean, but like you say, it wasn't just about the estate. And I mean, I have spoken to you before, Daphne, so I have a wee bit of information about this. And again, last thing I want to do is upset you, but your mother's funeral wasn't a particularly nice moment for yourself, was it? I mean,
as I just said, I think one of the most distressing things for the families, and there are lots of other cases I've spoken to, is the predator now has complete control of everything. So the man was in my mother's house and people kept saying, why don't you go in and get your things? Because some things just happened to be in there, because my mum had offered to look after them years before, like my wedding dress and my granddad's letters from the First World War. But he had now inherited them. They now belonged to him. They were not mine anymore. So that's one thing, just items of sentimental value. But the biggest thing was he was now in charge of her funeral. And that meant he could do what he liked. And what he liked was a secret burial. He's had her buried in a town near Leeds with which she had no connection. We didn't know when or where the funeral was, so we couldn't go. And the grave is unmarked to this day. We've been told we can't put up a headstone because he owns the grave plot. He's never bothered. And he remarried in 2018, so not that long after my mother died. So it is, for the families, it is an emotional and financial disaster. All the predators seem to follow the same pattern. They turn up out of nowhere. They're very, very over-friendly, both to the victim and the family. And then they gradually become colder and more hostile, as indeed ours did. He stopped speaking to me. It's just so bizarre, because it's not something that anyone who's not 8 years old would do. He just, when I went over to visit Mum, which I did several times a day, a couple of years after he turned up, he just stopped speaking to me. And all the other families report similar things. He would look at the ceiling, he would look at the floor, he would look at the television, but he wouldn't speak. And if I asked him a question, he wouldn't say anything. But quite honestly, this isn't about him for me, really. It's about my mum. So I thought, if he had been the nicest man in the world and the best intentioned, and I don't think he was, but if he had been, my mum was still not fit to marry. We know from a letter the registrars wrote she couldn't answer the questions on the day. But unfortunately, or some of the questions, she couldn't remember her address, she couldn't remember her date of birth. But the man had groomed them by saying, she's very old, true, she's very deaf, she's terminally ill, she had terminal cancer, she's very forgetful. All of that was true. But what he didn't say is she has a diagnosis of vascular dementia. Registrars, and it's not their fault, are not trained in assessing mental capacity. So when he explained all this to them, they just took his word for it. And therefore, when mum couldn't answer the questions, they didn't realise what a huge red flag that was, because they're not trained in safeguarding. So they just went ahead with the ceremony. One of them actually challenged it. One of them actually said to the other one, and I have this in writing, are you sure she's fit to marry? Because she can't remember things. And the other one went, oh, it'll be fine. And off they went. They just carried straight on. And that is why one of the changes we're hoping to bring in, and actually we have succeeded a long way with this, is just some robust procedures at marriage for registrars that they must follow. And thankfully, they are now planning to bring in a set list of questions. They don't need to be difficult questions. If you'd have asked my mum, what's the name of the man standing next to you, she would never have known. But a standard list of questions at marriage, with the idea that if you get one wrong, the marriage must be paused for a capacity assessment. I don't want the judgment of capacity, mental capacity, to be down to the registrars. It's not fair on them. They are low-paid clerical officials. They do 8 weddings a day sometimes. They have said to me, because they realise I'm on their side, sometimes we have to make decisions about mental capacity within a few minutes of meeting the person with no really robust tools. But I'm very pleased to say that the General Register Office, the headquarters, has now realised, our MP, Fabian Hamilton, went to see them, and we've had a lot of conversations with them, and they are now bringing in changes, which is brilliant. So, and those changes will include compulsory training on predatory marriage for all staff and a set list of questions at marriage. So there's a lot of progress been made there since 2016.
I mean, that's absolutely great to hear, isn't it? I mean, that's fantastic. But I mean, I guess, like we said, it is a worldwide issue, so maybe other places aren't so aware and aren't so tuned into it. And I mean, I remember speaking to someone I think previously, or sorry, reading about it, and I think they said they went to their father's wedding, a bit like yourself. They were out the blue. Their father was getting married, and he was crying at the altar, but not in not of joy, of distress. And you just think, how do these things ever happen? I mean, how does it? It almost beggars belief, doesn't it? I mean, it's how are these people being married?
I know it does beg a belief, but I think it's very hard for registrars. If you think of it from their point of view, they've got an expectant audience of 30 people in front of them, or however many. They have been threatened, if they try to stop a wedding, with everything from being sued for the cost of the honeymoon to physical violence. One registrar said to me, we're often the only people in the building on a Saturday morning, so there's nobody to help us if it turns nasty. So, and what they don't know is, if they do go ahead with the wedding, how difficult it is for the family to do anything about it. For one thing, it would be very hard. It would require a legal challenge in court to prove that the person didn't have capacity. The police tried to prosecute the man for forced marriage, because if you know that somebody lacks capacity to marry and you still go ahead and marry them, that is forced marriage. But the case failed when it got to the Crown Prosecution Service, because we can't prove that on that day of the marriage that she didn't make a miracle recovery just for long enough to get married. We know she didn't. Of course she didn't. I've spoken to various psychiatrists of the elderly, all of whom say she couldn't have possibly, but because they keep no evidence at marriage, nothing can be done about it. There's no video recordings. There's no audio recordings. It's impossible to prove, even though one of the registrars challenged it on the day. So that's why it's really difficult. There is also a glitch in British law whereby you can't annul a marriage once one party has died unless it was bigamous or incestuous. Okay, so fraudulent doesn't help, but you can't prove it was fraudulent because there's no evidence kept at marriage. It was a perfect storm of procedures that were lacking, basically.
Absolutely, it's one of those things that you just kind of wonder how it goes on. But it's such a shame. Can I maybe ask you about the victims of this? So, is there a pattern here? I mean, do they tend to be? I think most are going to assume that are they fairly wealthy? Elderly people who've lost a partner and have something. What's the kind of general sort of victim? It's been falling victim to this.
Fairly wealthy, it depends on how you define it, really. Mum, and people kept saying, oh, it's quite a small estate. I remember solicitors saying that. Excuse me, it was several $100,000, which is plenty of money to us, And I must say, all the money my parents had came from their own hard work. It was just, they were both from poor backgrounds and they worked very hard. They owned a house and they had some savings. However, I've heard another case where the sum involved was £5 million. So it can really vary, but it is a very easy way at the moment of making a lot of money very quickly if you're very unscrupulous. So this is the holes that we're trying to fill in.
And how are they, the predators, how are they meeting, these elderly people? Because like the same, they're probably not out and about, in nightclubs or in bars like the younger generation. I'm assuming they're not using online dating apps. So how are they making that point of contact and sparking the relationship?
As far as we know, because Mum already had a diagnosis of dementia when she met him, but she seemed to have met him by the garden gate. He seemed to have walked past. She will have been gardening. She was always out there gardening. And when she had really bad dementia, she wasn't doing anything very effective in the garden, but she loved it. So that was what she was doing. And of course, we lived next door, and not even next door. There was no fence between us. It was just across the lawn. Her house had been built in the garden of the old family home. So she seems to have met him by the garden gate. She seems to have invited him in for a cup of tea, which again, she would not have done before she got dementia with a man she didn't know. And interestingly, the first thing she ever said to me about him was, oh, there are a few old ladies he visits. And that really worried me because I didn't know how old he was because it was very hard to get a straight answer out of him on anything. But he was certainly younger than her. And I did once ask him how old he was. And he said, oh, 70s. Well, he wasn't. At the time I asked him, he was 62. He was a lot younger than she was. So we spent a lot of time in the first few months wondering what to do. Went to all the authorities for help, police, social services, everyone. And everyone was just, we don't know what to do. It was just a situation they hadn't come across. In those days, nobody knew the term predatory marriage and nobody had any real thoughts as to what to do about it. The social services went and investigated and they rang me and said, no, nothing to worry about, no safeguarding concerns because Mum was clean and well fed. And also the man called himself her carer. And that worked an absolute treat with everybody, with the hospital, with the GP, everybody. And I spent a lot of time jumping up and down saying, he's not a carer. He's just some bloke who's moved into a house. But it got me nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
But when you talk about him sort of, walking around the area and meeting other older women, that is quite sinister. So literally these sort of people are sort of cruising around trying to, or identifying people and trying to sort of get relationships going or conversations. It's pretty sinister, isn't it? That's not a nice thing to think about,
No, as a result of what had happened to us, a particular care home put a coded lock on their door because they realized that there was nothing to stop visitors just coming in. And I heard from another case, and this was actually in Sweden, that they had heard of a care home where people just waited outside until people were coming out and then went in to chat up the victims. And I have heard the chilling term from another case again, dementia harvesting, where you find someone with dementia and you find a way of getting all their assets. Just horrendous. And there's about 900,000 with people with dementia in the UK, and it's set to double. So this is why I thought something needs to be done about this now. There is no time to waste. Yeah,
absolutely. And in terms of the predators, shall we say, if we can maybe just focus them for a second. So is there a particular, I'm assuming it's mostly males, but is there a particular type of background or type of demographic, or is it very varied who's actually doing this predatory activities?
It's not mostly males, actually. It seems to be males and females equally. And no, there seems to be no particular demographic. I'm convinced there's something about how to do it on the dark web because they all follow the same pattern. But that, again, could just be because they all have a similar narcissistic type of personality where they think they're right and everything that they're doing is fine. So it could be just that. So no, there's no particular type, but all the cases, as I've said, tend to follow the same pattern. So the changes at the Register Office are great, but the other thing that needs to change is the law, this legal incentive. And the Law Commission did a consultation into marriage. It was actually during the pandemic, so hardly anybody heard about it. Anyone could fill it in. I did. And they're now waiting to come up with their decision on it. They're also in the middle of a consultation into wills. So we're waiting to hear back on both of those because, for example, one of the things in the marriage consultation was, is it okay if you just have one registrar at marriage rather than two? And I said very strongly, no, the second one is a barrier. It's like you have two nurses when someone's having chemotherapy. So they're trying to modernize weddings, and that's a good idea, but we're waiting to see what they come up with. Our MP has now raised this in Parliament 3 times. The third time was just a couple of weeks ago, in fact, to say they'd pause the wills consultation for the marriage consultation. And why couldn't they do both, basically? Can they please get on with it? Because it is a real time is of the issue. Time is really important here because of the number of people with dementia.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing that strikes me is that there could be people listening right now, I don't know, in America, Australia, Britain, wherever it is, they could have an elderly parent or relative who could be married and they don't know about it. You think you've put maybe your mother, your father, your uncle, your aunt in a safe place, and they could have got married to one of these predators and you just don't know about it. I mean, it really is a scandal, you know.
And it's a global scandal. I've done an interview, for example, on Radio New Zealand, because it's happening there. Of course it's happening. It's happening anywhere there is dementia, and the procedures have not caught up. One thing that everyone assumes could have protected my mother is that I had power of attorney. And I've had people, really very educated people, almost yelling at me, why didn't you have power of attorney? And when I say I did, they are astonished. But I've spoken to the Office of the Public Guardian, who are in charge of power of attorney, and there is absolutely no connection with marriage because no one thought to put one there. So if you have power of attorney, and there's 2 kinds, there's the old-fashioned enduring kind, there's the new lasting power of attorney. Neither of them have any connection with marriage. So if you have power of attorney for your loved one and someone plans to marry them, you would not be told. And I think that's a really important thing to know. Power of attorney is no help to you there.
I know some places, you know, you can get married out with a church or a religious setting or a registrar office. And is that worrying for you as well? Because, you know, if you can get married, say, anywhere, which in some countries you can, I guess that makes it easier for this to happen because you don't physically have to take the person to a church, you know, to a registry office, to a synagogue or whatever it may be. You know, you can just do it at home. Is that quite worrying for you that seems to be a trend that's becoming more popular?
Yes, and part of the marriage consultation was bringing more of that in. And I think that's fine as long as you have very thorough safeguarding checks beforehand. Because let's face it, it would be a brave registrar who would stop a marriage in someone's living room, wouldn't it? Really difficult. So, yeah, I think the idea of making marriage more accessible is a good one, but it needs proper safeguarding at the, before it can take place. And they should have separate interviews at the notification of marriage. So when you go to say, we're going to get married, and then another separate interview on the morning of the marriage itself. But registrars have freely admitted to me they don't always do that because they're pushed for time. They're just told, come on, get on with it. You've got another 7 weddings to do today. And they don't realise the importance of it. So that is another thing that I would like to be absolutely set in stone, those separate interviews.
Yeah. And for anyone listening right now that may think, hold on a minute here, my elderly parents been around someone. Are they married? Are they not married? And maybe you could tell us about the UK, but also generally, what can people do to check and see if their parent has got married secretly?
Well, one of the problems is the notification of marriage at the moment is just put up in the one register office that you're going to. So if you wanted to check that your loved one was planning to marry, you'd have to go to every register office in the country once a month to check. And it's either on a board in the hallway or it's behind the counter in a file. It's a right old faff.
It's a physical paper copy, you're meaning, actually. It's a physical bit of paper stuck on a wall. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it is. So one thing that we want, and I think, I haven't had confirmation, but I think they're going to bring this in. One of the first things we thought of was easily searchable internet database. That's what we want, of people who plan to marry. We had a Google alert for both their names because we were so worried. And if there'd been a database with planned marriages, we would have found out. One thing that people can do if they're worried about that somebody is hanging around their elderly parent is you can take out a caveat in expectation of marriage, and that's a legal thing. You'd have to go to a solicitor, and it needs to be a specialist solicitor, because we went to our ordinary family solicitor and she said, oh no, she won't be able to marry because of her dementia. She didn't know what she didn't know. There's nothing in place to stop it. So it's a caveat in expectation of marriage that you want, and that would or should alert the registrars to the fact that somebody's really worried about this. Whether it would absolutely work, I don't know, and it would certainly cost you, but it would cost you a lot less than losing the whole estate, and it would cost you emotionally a lot less than losing the funeral and all trace of your parent.
Yeah, and just going back to going back to yourself. So, when they were married, or when your mum had remarried, and I put that in quotation marks. When you'd go over to the house, what was the dynamic between her and her new husband? I mean, was it like man and wife at all, or was it just never. Completely? Yeah.
No, I think the first thing she said to me about him when did you get him for me? Who is he? Where's he come from? She never knew his name. And then as time went on, she kind of just accepted he was there, but she didn't know. I think she thought he was some sort of carer, if she thought anything. And sometimes when her dementia got really bad, she would just say, there are people about. And that was, I cannot overstate how bad and how advanced her dementia was. And looking back now, I would have got him out of the house by any means possible, but there weren't any legal means available to us. And that is the really sad thing. We tried everything legal. I did say to the police when they came and said that the CPS couldn't prosecute purely because of lack of evidence, I said, so what you're saying to me is I should have got men with baseball bats early on. And the policewoman said, I can't hear you say that. And I said, no, and I didn't do it. And I wouldn't do it. I'm terribly legally minded. But what other alternative was there? And she said, no, there wasn't. So there we go. It's a huge gap. And that is why we need to take away the incentive for people to do it.
Yeah, and you said that your mum's new husband, shall we say, or fraudulent husband, he has remarried. So is that? Do you suspect? Well, you must know. Is that another predatory still marriage, or is that a legitimate marriage?
hard to know. We know, and the reason we found out was because her grandson rang both me and our MP, because he'd identified the man from our website. Not that I name him. I never name him. I won't name him because it's not about him. It's about my mum and the procedures that let her down. But no, it's hard to know, except she was very vulnerable because I understand her husband had just died. And the man, like all these people, is very plausible and very charming. And I can't overemphasize that. I'm always saying this when I talk to safeguarding professionals, social workers. The people who are the most believable are going to be the predators. The family can come over as a bit hysterical. I remember when I went to the police and I was saying all the things that he'd done, and they were just going, "This woman's crazy." The second time we went to the police, we sadly hit on a very old-fashioned Life on Mars type policeman who listened very intently, wrote it all down, and then said, "Oh, people will say you just don't like him," because he could not believe what I was saying. Things like, we went on holiday and he painted my front door blue. Weird things, just weird. And in fact, the police always said, "He's very odd, Daphne. He's very odd." I don't care. I just wanted my mum protecting from him. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the person's clean, they're fed, the house looks okay.
Yeah.
There's no out, all the things that we assume as care are taken care of. So they're not abusing the person. They're taking care of them in the hope that they'll pass away quite soon and they can benefit. So it's quite a sneaky crime, and it's more than sneaky. Yeah.
But actually, the house didn't look okay. Downstairs looked okay. I don't know if he let the social workers in when they came round to visit, but downstairs looked okay. Social workers have no right of entry, unlike the police. So that's a problem too. Upstairs was an absolute tip. And we found that out because one time when he was out, my brother rushed upstairs and took some photos. It was it looked like a hoarder's den because the man is a hoarder. And it just looked horrendous. But we couldn't get social services to look upstairs. And to me, again, that's no proof of abuse, but it's a huge red flag that something is not right here. And that's the thing that nobody picked up on.
Yeah, it's almost like you're preparing the downstairs in case anyone visits, but upstairs, that's how I really am, and it's yeah. I mean, I'm conscious that you've been like you say, you've been all around the world talking. You've spoke to many people. You've become a campaigner. If you type in your name on Google, Predatory Marriage. But I'm really struck that we haven't. Your mum kicked all this off, and we haven't really. I don't know much about your mum, so I think we might just say, tell us about your mum, because we hear all this sort of stuff about her dementia, but what was she like in her life? What kind of person was she? Tell us a lot about her.
Well, this is the thing. She was very, very kind and caring to everyone, very, very sociable, but incredibly sporty. She was being coached for the Olympics in Barrow-in-Furness in her youth in swimming, but sadly it was wartime and Hitler put a stop to it by dropping a bomb on the swimming pool. So, but she carried on being sporty, and I think this actually helped facilitate the marriage because she looked younger than she was. At the age of 80, she could walk 5 miles with no problem easily, and she went on to be Leeds University. She was very academic. She got the only scholarship in the Northwest to university. At Leeds University, she was captain of the hockey team. She edited the student newspaper, The Griffin, which is still going today. Then she left and when she graduated, she became a journalist in London on an old newspaper called the News Chronicle. And then she came back and married my dad, who was a pharmacist, and became a very, very much loved teacher. But what she loved was any kind of sport, any kind of dancing, and a party. That was her big thing. We had a fantastic party for her 90th birthday. She didn't know she was 90. She hadn't a clue what it was about, but she loved it because it was a party. And her favourite thing, especially even with dementia, if something was nice, she would say, "Oh, it was like a party." And that's what she loved. Very, very sociable, loved by everybody. If I could put up a headstone, and I hope to eventually on her grave, although I'm not legally allowed to, but I hope to, it would say something like Joan Blass, loved by all, because she really was.
Well, that's lovely to hear, because I just think we're talking a lot about her, and this whole thing's come from her life, and I just feel sometimes, when I read a lot of reports on this, the victims are just almost glossed over, and everyone focuses on the other thing. But But these were people. These were people, and they had a life. And I think I just thought it was nice to hear a little bit about her and get an idea. She sounds a formidable woman anyway. I've got to say, a very formidable woman, but a good mother, I'm sure, as well, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, just brilliant. Yes, we were a really close family, and this is another reason why I thought I have to be the one doing the campaigning. Our family was so close. We were known for being close. We were in the same drama group. We always went on holiday together with my husband and my son and my mother and my father. We always went on holiday together every year. We were really close, and we were physically close and emotionally close. So I thought, if it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. I've had other cases saying to me, oh no, I couldn't stop it because I live 200 miles away. And I keep saying, I couldn't stop it, and I live 30 yards away. That's how fast. That is how easy it is to do at the moment. But yeah, it is going to change.
Yeah, and my final thing to ask you just quickly was, about her burial. Are you hoping one day maybe to get that back to a place that you think, because you said she's been buried in a place that had no meaning to her? Are you hoping to reverse that, or is that a dead end legally?
It's a bit of, it would take a legal challenge, and quite honestly, she wanted to be cremated. That's what she wanted. But she had a phobia of burial. But for me, I think the thing I want to do really is, and I've visited her grave quite a few times, and as far as I can see, the man's never been near it. It's never been any signs he has. There's no headstone. I just would like to put up a simple headstone, because we know where she is. But at the moment, that unmarked grave is, to me, a monument to injustice, and I want it remedied.
Yeah, well, it may be an unmarked grave, Daphne, but the work you're doing and her legacy and the things you're talking about live on. So a piece of stone doesn't change that, Daphne. So that's what I would say. The way you talk about it and the legacy, you're going out and spreading this word. So she's making a difference, no matter headstone or not. Can I just ask you as well, for people listening, if can they get in touch with you for advice? Is there a way to do that? Is there a website, a social media? Yes, what's the best way if they want to reach out?
Our email address is on our website. The website is www.predatorymarriage, all one word, UK, predatorymarriage.uk. And you can also find us very easily on Facebook. Search Predatory Marriage, and up we come very easily. And one way that people can help, because they often say, what can I do to help, is write to their MP and ask their MP to support Fabian Hamilton's campaign against predatory marriage. He has done a terrific job for us. He has really taken the issue on board and absolutely crusaded forward with it. And that has just been brilliant. And he has got a lot of cross-party support. He raised it in Parliament in 2018. And got loads of support. It was passed unanimously for a second reading, our bill, but sadly ran out of time because of it was the middle of Brexit. Everything else was going on. But Fabian has never dropped it, and I think we'll get there eventually. It's taken 6 years so far, but already changes are happening, and I think we will get there. But we just need to speed it up, because it could be us or our parents or this needs to change before it happens to more people.
Yeah, well, I would urge anyone, even if you're in another part of the world or in the UK, wherever you are. I mean, Daphne is a font of knowledge on this thing and really understands it from the inside out. So if you're worried, get in touch. And hopefully today we've raised a bit of awareness. We've let people know what Predatory Marriage is. And thank you so much for coming on, Daphne. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate it. Thank you.